Okay. All right, cool. Um, yeah, thanks for kind of everything that we've covered so far, Helly. I know we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of topics. The last thing I wanted to look at is we've got a few questions from the community. Um, so people across Conway have sent in, I think we've got 4 questions to touch on. Before we do get into that, is there anything that you think we perhaps haven't covered or anything that you want to reiterate?
Yeah, I think I would love to talk about how to have these conversations to start being able to, approach people who you might be worried about. So just a little bit about that, and then I'd love to dig into the questions.
Okay, that sounds good. I think we've got a slide on that, haven't we? This one?
Yeah, so if we go up a couple of slides to having the conversation, just a couple of from slide 20, I think it is. Yeah,
This
so
one?
this is perfect. So yeah, I think one of the biggest things that people face is being able to have this conversation. So we've talked a lot about how to recognize it in ourselves and perhaps recognize it in other people. But and but often the biggest hurdle is knowing how to approach this conversation. People tend to either worry that they might say the wrong thing and not have the conversation, or think that they have to have all the answers. So um, if we move on to the next slide, one of the biggest things that people face, the actual person going through burnout or prolonged stress at work or facing stress outside of work, is they can often be the last person to actually realize it.
Yeah,
And this is what makes these conversations really important, and what makes having a culture where people talk about mental health, not just when it's happening, when it's in the kind of crisis mode, or in an area or a time when somebody's really experiencing hard times. Stress is happening at work all the time. Pressure is happening all the time. So we need to get really good about destigmatizing it, and also knowing that the denial is happening, usually in the person that's suffering. And why that is because cognitively, you're so overwhelmed at the time that it's really hard. You're almost too close to your own burnout or your own stress to be able to recognize it. And countless people that I've worked with and am working with, they're kind of maybe their husband or their wife or their manager has been saying to them, their parents, but they kind of still don't fully recognize it in themselves. So that's
yeah,
why it's quite delicate having these conversations. But it is really possible, and it's really helpful. Another one is stigma. When you're going through burnout, it can feel, or prolonged stress, it can feel like a personal failure. So people often don't want to admit it because they don't want to be seen as somebody who's struggling. They don't want to, they might be thinking about going for a promotion, if they admit that maybe they're, or there's a project they want to work on, or they're working on that they do love, and they think, if I start admitting that there might be areas that are a problem for me right now, I might not get the same opportunities, or I might be thought of as the problem person. So again, that's why, as workplace cultures, leaders, managers, everybody in the organization sharing, pressure is normal, stress is normal, and the more open we are about it, the more people feel less stigma. They're able to talk about it earlier. And as we both know from the work that we do, it's earlier prevention or earlier intervention is much better than when it's much further down the line. So in the next slide that we'll go to now is just a little example of how we start to have these conversations with people. And this is based on a framework that the Health and Safety Executive have spent a lot of time preparing, and it's something that I use within my work, and it's really, really helpful. so that when you're going into one of those conversations, whether that's with a colleague, a friend, a loved one, you're able to feel more resourced for it. So the first one is trying to prepare for that conversation. So, rather than kind of doing it off the huff and just kind of going for it, if you choose your moment, because remembering when somebody's stressed, stress creates, emotion, a heightened emotion. So it's really good to think about, is there a good time that I can do this? Where will I do it? Trying to do it away from other colleagues, teammates, away from the situation. That isn't always possible because, they might bring it to you or something might come up and you need to deal with it quite quickly. But being as prepared as possible is great. And that's also preparing oneself, because if you're stressed and you're going into a conversation with somebody who's experiencing stress, as we know, that's not going to be so helpful. So preparation is key. The second one is
just on preparation, Helly.
Yeah.
So would you say it's kind of a useful rule of thumb to try and have the conversation outside of the work environment if possible?
Yeah, I mean, it can be in your kind of like one-to-one meeting. It can be, I know this is, could we go for a walk? Could we go for a coffee? And maybe what can be hard as well if someone's going through a stressful time, if you've never taken that person for a coffee and then you suddenly want to take them for a coffee, that could be another area of stress for them. They could think they're in trouble. So it's being quite nuanced with what happens with that individual. So something that just feels right for that situation. Don't be scared of having the conversation, especially if you are responsible in some way as maybe a line manager or a colleague working on a project. It might happen in a more formal situation like a one-to-one meeting, but it's just being prepared and preparing yourself. So I think just having those deep breaths, thinking in advance what questions you're going to ask, how you can maybe possibly change your wording. So moving on to the next point. So noticing what's happening, being able to say, I've noticed that perhaps you've reacted differently to colleagues over the past few weeks, and that's out of character for you. So it feels like you're noticing the behavior, but you're also saying that it's out of character for that person. And then the next step is to be able to just listen. And this is probably the hardest part. And this is hard if we're having it as somebody who is a manager of somebody or a colleague, but also as a friend or a loved one. Just listening. I think we believe that we should have the answers and that we should be able to fix it. So it's almost kind of like sitting on your hands and pausing, breathing, and really connecting with that person. Because often what happens, why listening is so important, is it's part of the therapeutic relationship, and people are able to then, what's going on inside their head, they're often so close to it and often being quite negative towards themselves or perhaps even the workplace or that project, that they're almost not noticing what's going on or the reality of it. So sometimes just being able to speak, they figure things out themselves, or we figure things out ourselves. We just need to be able to kind of offload. And then sometimes that's enough.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's enough. And then, and then moving on to the next part is being able to say, okay, I've noticed you saying, would you benefit from, going to the employee assistance program? Would you think chatting to your GP would be helpful? Or it could be, is there anything I can do to help you with this? It might be, you might notice as they talk, okay, do you think breaking down this project into smaller parts it's seeming quite overwhelming at the moment. I can help you with that. Would that be helpful? Or would you like to meet again in 2 weeks and talk about this? Would you like me to call you in 2 days? And then as employers or managers, there might be reasonable adjustments that need making. It might be, okay, you know, what would you like to happen with this? This is, and knowing what's available, being aware of what kind of things are available. But you don't need to be the expert. You are not meant to be the expert. You're there to listen and have that conversation. And you can say, I don't know about that right now, but I will go and find out. And just opening the conversation is the most important thing, I think, being able to have that conversation and not thinking that you need to have all the answers. Because often what happens as well is, as a manager, as a line manager, I think it's something around 70 plus% of managers are not trained to have these conversations, and are not aware of what is available a lot of the time. So giving yourself that credit and saying, okay, I'll find out how best can I help you. And then another thing that I'm not sure I've mentioned before, but it's really important, as much as we're talking about prolonged workplace stress and burnout, a lot of the symptoms that people could be experiencing might fit into this category, but they might not be. They might be some underlying health condition. So it's always a medical disclaimer is, you know, always get those things checked out first before you, you know, diagnose oneself with workplace stress.
Yeah, I think this is fantastic, and it's the way that it's laid out is really easy to follow. And in particular, the listen, don't fix box. You know, that's something for anybody who's watched any of our other Changemakers conversations. It's something that comes up just across the board, like this approach to a delicate conversation and entering it with this mentality of, I'm here to listen and not to fix. And I think in the workplace, there's perhaps even more temptation to go into fix mode and think, you know, most meetings we go to in work, we're trying to work towards some form of resolution, or what are the next steps, or kind of what was the point of this meeting? Like, that's what work is in a way. So I think this is a really important point, because that temptation to try and resolve and to try and advise and to try and lay out next steps is going to be most pronounced in a workplace setting with a work colleague. So the advice of, that's not what we need to do here, I think is really important.
I think it really is. And like you said, across many of the conversations, it's a fundamental thing that we often as humans forget. And just the listening experience is so important, to have another person hold space for you and listen and be honest that they don't have all the answers. And often what comes at these times as well is, you know, people are often experiencing stress in other areas when this is happening, and they are, if we're talking about the workplace setting, those things are out of your control and they are not the workplace responsibility. But also we need to listen to the whole human, and it could be, which direction is it? It's bi-directional. Is it the workplace stress then making problems at home worse? Is it the problems at home meaning that you're not as resourced? And that matters, but it also doesn't matter, because a human is a human. So we just need to be able to listen, and then we can pick out the parts that we can help with, which is, you know, these areas of work design, which are the organization's responsibility. If you know, if the demand is too much for too long, or if the department isn't resourced, it will affect the individuals. So, and then on the other side, you know, if it is problems, well, if it is stresses outside of work, we don't just get rid of the person because they've got stuff going on, hopefully we can say, okay, is there something we could do that might help that for a short amount of time for you to then be resourced to do your work? And because good work is, even in challenging times, is actually really good for our mental health and really good for our, you know, our whole life. So often people, when they are going through challenging times, they'll say, oh, it's work that saved me. So but the issue can be, if work is not set up right and it's a kind of burnout shop, and then you're going through hard times in your life, it becomes too much. So it's a really delicate balance, and it's really individual to the person, to the organization, to the timing. So just having those conversations is really important. It's like a hug, you know, without hugging someone.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And perhaps the final observation on here, you've spoken about just kind of creating this culture of openness. And as you were talking then, I was thinking of the previous slide that said denial and stigma. And I guess an important point is, just by following these steps doesn't mean that denial and stigma is going to be removed. So it may be that, you know, you have what looks like from the outside the best approach to having this kind of conversation with a colleague, but that denial and stigma is still there. But even that, it still isn't a failure, because essentially what that conversation does is give permission to that person that if at the moment they're still in denial or still feel stigma around it, when that does erode, perhaps a few weeks down the line, they know the person that they can then go to have that conversation.
That is such a good point. That is like such a good point, because just because it might not happen at that moment, but they know they've got a safe space, and the more of these conversations and that you start being able to have with that person or with multiple people, it means at the time when someone can hear it, that they know who they can go to. And I think as well, it's building these conversations into the workplace more regularly, and that's something that is, you know, advised by the HSE, and you know, that really helps with culture. It's not just waiting. It's like having a little framework of being, you know, in our one-to-ones, in our team meetings, we do these check-ins. So it's not just when something goes wrong, it's more, you know, culturally it's built in. And I think one of the things that comes up is, a lot of the time when I'm speaking to senior people, they have this, I totally get it. They have this thing that they think, if we start speaking about stress and we start training our staff in stress, people will start pulling the stress card. And that is not the case, actually. The more that we start talking about it as an organization, the more the employees become the active part of the change, and they bring the solutions. So by doing things like risk assessments, which are, you know, you're supposed to be doing legally within your organization, just as you would any other health and safety check, by making the whole team, the whole organization part of that, it brings the conversations to life. And also we become the people who make the change. The people in the organization want to make the change. And I think leaders often think that if we don't talk about stress, it's going to like go away somehow. And it's like, no, it's still there. But people, it's almost becomes like, I would say, like gossip. Like gossip in like friendships is never good. And it's almost like that. It has a detrimental effect. Just because you're not speaking about it doesn't mean it's not there. So and I think all the facts and figures show that, you know, £1 spent on this kind of training returns like a return on investment of £4. But people are just often don't want to talk, and it's performance goes up, when people feel, when work is stressful, do you want to go towards it or do you want to go away from it? When work is a great environment that also has pressure, some pressure is good. Some pressure to get stuff done is really good. The right amount of pressure and the right amount of conversations around workplace stress, and a culture where people can talk about struggles means that they want to show up. They want to do the best work.
I think that is a fantastic bit of advice and a good bit of myth busting as well. It reminded me a lot of, if anybody's received, it's quite a heavy topic, but if anybody's ever received training on suicide awareness, there's a bit of an overlap there where a myth, I'd say, is if I speak to somebody about are they feeling suicidal, am I therefore planting the seed or making it more likely that they're like, oh, that could be an option for me? And actually the opposite is true. Like, all the data says that that is not the case. But it's a tricky one because it feels logically true before you receive some training on it. So I do see an equivalence there with, I think you could understand a manager or a managing director saying, well, logically, if I don't speak about stress, then I'm not planting the seed for my colleagues or for my staff to think that they are stressed or go, oh, maybe that's me. I could understand the logic, but I think everything that you've said kind of busts that as a bit of a myth.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And yeah, I think that's why it's so important to do stuff like this, isn't it? To get the word out. And it's really interesting to hear that about suicide as well. Thanks for that.
Yeah. And actually, so a lot of stuff that we've covered actually links in with some of the questions that we've had. So let me get these up on screen if I can. Because I think the 3 or 4 questions that we've had seem to me to come from people who have just been curious about perhaps their own workplace or their own approach. So yeah, if it's all right with you, Helly, I can give you a dive straight into these.
Definitely. I think they're the best kind of questions when it's from, what people are really experiencing.
Yeah. So this one, for example, this does cover something that you started touching on. So the question is, when we talk about burnout, are we sometimes focusing so much on work that we miss the pressures people are carrying outside of it? So do we sometimes overlook what people are carrying outside of work too?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a brilliant question. And so I think, first of all, what we need to do is, when we're talking about workplace stress, when we're talking about burnout, that's classified by the World Health Organization as occupational phenomenon. I can never say that word properly. So they are very distinct about, we're talking about workplace stress. And the reason that they do that is so then we can look at what's happening in the workplace, and we can, look at interventions, look at the work design, and look at what we can actually do within the workplace. So we just need to make that distinction when we talk about burnout in this context. But as we all know, no person, exists in a silo. And, what's happening in our personal life throughout our lives does affect how we show up for work, and vice versa, as we said before. So, and also people throughout life will go through different changes, different stresses outside of work. And it doesn't mean that we don't make adaptations or we aren't able to, be able to help them and be able to talk. So yes, we are talking about stress at work, and stress at work, like I said before, we're not trying to eliminate pressure at work, because a workplace without any pressure, good pressure, it can be just as destructive as a workplace with too much pressure. So, but we have to treat each human as a human being with things going on. But then on the flip side of that, we're there to do a job. So it's what can we do reasonably to help somebody going through this? And as an employer, have we provided the right tools? Have we provided the right resources? Or has the pressure become too much for too long? So I'm not sure if that answers that question properly, but
no, I think it does. And it also made me think, the way we're approaching the answer to this question is almost as somebody who is observing somebody else who is suffering with burnout. But I wondered to myself whether the same question is true for when we are feeling stressed. It can be quite easy to quickly direct our attention towards, well, it's work that's causing me to feel the way that I'm feeling and feel the stress that I'm feeling. And it can sometimes be, I don't know, it can paper over some cracks or help you avoid some difficult truths about other parts of life that aren't going as well. Do you see what I mean? It can be very easy just to lay all your stress at the door of, well, this is work related stuff, whereas actually there might be, other parts of life to have an honest conversation or honest reflection with yourself about.
It's definitely true. And I think sometimes how we approach, we might have used work to avoid, or we might be using work to avoid things in our personal life. Mm-hmm. So if we've perhaps been very driven at work and that's been our focus, and then something's happening in our personal life, then it could feel very much like, oh, it's work. But it might be the fact that we're just focusing so much on work that's as a coping mechanism for avoiding things in our life. So yeah, it is very individual.
Yeah.
And it's true, but we always got to look at ourselves as a whole person. And I think a lot of things is like capacity, like, let's be honest about where I'm putting different parts of my life and what I've got capacity for at the moment. A lot of people that come to me have spent maybe decades working without responsibilities outside of work. So maybe they've worked their 20s and 30s without children. Mm-hmm. And they've been very driven, and they've perhaps not even taken holidays, and or they've just been very work driven, and then they have children or maybe a partner or parents that they need to take care of. And suddenly what happens is they can't do the crazy amount of work that they did before. So that's quite interesting when working with those people, because they've built their life so much around work that then when they have other things, it feels like they're not coping at work, but it's because they put such an amount of resource of their life into work that then when they have to split it to have a life outside of work, it feels like, oh, it's work.
Yeah.
I'm not able to cope like I used to. But they are some of the people that I work with, and then it's quite hard to get that balance of.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because then that mindset starts playing with your identity, doesn't it? If you are that type of person who's had 15 years of real pedal to the metal, I work really hard, I get loads done, and then suddenly you're unable to do that, and you haven't properly joined the dots that there's external circumstances that means that's not possible. That can be like a real difficult thing to navigate. You're just like, well, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I able to get through the to-do list as quickly as I used to be able to?
That's exactly what it is. It really is an identity struggle, because what happens is often these people, they don't feel like they're as good at work anymore, which has been a sole identity, but they also are struggling in whatever the personal life focus is. They don't feel good at that because they're so focused on work. So they feel like, oh, I'm not good at anything anymore, or I'm yeah. So it can be quite a difficult shift, and in a society where we are very focused on work, it can be quite hard, and also things like, as people get into sometimes the peak of their career, it can be, say, like mid-50s. For women, there could be things around menopause. For men as well, different things going on for them with their health or energy or family. And then they suddenly start feeling like, oh, is there something wrong with me? Which there isn't. It's just a different phase of life. And we don't want those people who've built up such great careers, great knowledge, great experience, usually in that role, in that organization. You don't want those people to leave. We just need to be like, okay, things are a little bit different now. How can I show up now with my different responsibilities? It's sometimes a mind shift. Yeah.
So the next question. So we've started pulling at this thread, and I have to say it's already been, I don't know, for me and hopefully for people listening, quite refreshing to hear you saying, I'm conscious not to put words in your mouth for the answer to this question either, but I think the stereotype might be, for somebody watching this video or seeing that this kind of video exists, oh, this person is just going to talk about, we need to be caring for people in work, we need to remove workload where possible, and we just need to make the environment this kind of fluffy utopia where everybody's happy all the time. And if that's, if that means not as much work gets done, then that's okay, because we've just got to prioritize well-being. But actually, I've sensed in some of your answers that there does need to be a balance. So with that in mind, the question that we've got is, I'm a line manager. The work does need to get done. People do get paid for the work. The work is sometimes stressful. There are times when there's lots to do. It seems to me that I'm not allowed to say these things anymore, as it appears I don't care or I'm inconsiderate of others' mental health.
This is a brilliant question, and it gets asked a lot. So thank you, whoever asked this question. So yeah, totally, as you said, the work needs to get done. We're there to be paid. We're not going to work for free. So we've got to make sure that we are able to do the work that we're being paid to do. So what this line manager has said is very, very real. And what you said, I think sometimes that's what people think. They think, I'm going to come in, I'm going to say, let's just breathe and do yoga. But I'm all about optimizing people to do the best work they can for the individual and the organization. So yeah, we've got to be very real. And as a line manager, it is hard because you're often the closest in work to seeing what's really going on. So you want to have like a friendly, nurturing, well-being relationship with those people. But at the end of the day, there are jobs to be done. And I think what the difference is, pressure, a good amount of pressure is good. When pressure goes wrong is when there's too much pressure for too long. So say a person is being asked to work outside, they're being given so much work that they're taking it home, they're finishing work, they're opening up the laptop after they've put the kids to bed, doing 2 hours, they're getting emails from their manager late at night, feeling that they need to respond to it, and they're not able to switch off for a long period of time. That on occasion, when agreed, is okay. But if that keeps happening, well, that person isn't resourced to be able to keep taking that amount of pressure. So then that becomes stress. And that's when we need to do something about it. But as a manager, yeah, we need to get work done. We need to be upfront. I think this manager, rightly so, can say, you know, this is what needs to get done. How can I help? You seem to be maybe overwhelmed at the moment. How can I help you with this? And I think that being really honest about, because in the HSE framework and all of the work that they've done, it's reasonable adjustments. So if somebody can't do the job because they can't do it for whatever reason, well, there's no reasonable adjustment that can be made, because it's reasonable. So for the job to be done. So, you know, say if somebody's on a production line, you can't ask to work from home because you need to pick your kids up, because it's just not possible in that job. That's a very clear-cut example. But yeah, so the work does need to get done. So I think it's just being really, really open with that, and and I think that's why these conversations need to come in earlier and need to be part of the every one-to-one. So it's, okay, what's happening? And then what projects have we got on? How can we make this run smoothly? How can we all do this together? Because the work does need to be done. And I think that's why when people don't talk about it for longer, it's almost avoiding saying the work needs to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes almost too far. The person's stress becomes too much. And, you know, so often people who are very capable, because they're capable, they get given more and more and more tasks in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are able to have open conversations earlier, that might be addressed quicker, because it's often the capable person that burns out. Because whereas they could say, okay, the work needs to get done. What can I do? What help do you need? Rather than it getting to this kind of critical point.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Because I think, I don't know the person who submitted this question, but reading through it, it smacks to me of somebody who would probably not communicate this. So essentially, you just end up with two people, a line manager getting increasingly frustrated that things aren't getting done, and an employee getting increasingly stressed or maybe increasingly frustrated that there's no way of communicating with their line manager. That stigma comes around, that denial comes around, that if I bring it up, are they just going to fire me? And it's just kind of what's the phrase? It's just a perfect storm where two people are just getting more and more frustrated, and it can just be solved by communicating early, or not even communicating early. The ideal is making it part of the culture, like having consistent space, say in a monthly one-to-one, where these type of topics there's room for these type of topics to be discussed rather than them being hidden or secret.
Yeah, exactly. And it's usually, the fixes are usually quite simple when identified early on. And I think what happens when line managers are struggling like this, which happens all over, like it's so common, line managers usually fall in one of two categories when they're struggling with this. And one is the kind of line manager who's very friendly and empathetic and feels like they're having a lot of well-being check-ins, but it becomes more, as you said before, that kind of culture of like, it's all about well-being to the detriment of work. And then the other side, the other line manager who's perhaps struggling is the one that's so scared to have the conversation that the work needs to get done, or that people are struggling, that they are not having any conversations. So it's like a pendulum. So it's kind of meeting in the middle with, the work needs to get done, but we do care about you too. So how can we do this? It's a kind of, it's a nice balance. But it's knowing which one, not to go too far that way, not to go too far. Because within work, then there does need to be boundaries and parameters. And as a line manager, you're not the therapist, but you do need to be empathetic and caring, and you are responsible as a manager for people's well-being to a certain degree.
Yeah, nice.
Being approachable, the right kind of approachable, is a really great way to be.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And that idea of the pendulum and kind of communicating our way to the midpoint, I think is good.
Yeah.
Because also, without like reading way too much into the wording of this question, but the last part, appears I don't care or I'm inconsiderate, suggests that this person, they're probably asking this question from a place of caring, if you know what I mean. So, something just as simple as if this person was to have the conversation about low work rate, let's say, just caveating it at the start by saying, I'm really conscious, I don't want this to come across as not caring about your well-being, or I'm conscious I might be missing something around your workload. But
you've said it. You've said it perfectly. You need to write these top tips. You framed it perfectly. Yeah, and it just reminded me what both usually care, but one is perhaps more avoidant in their approach, and one is, going anxiously towards. So it's coming to that more secure line manager. But they both usually do care, but their approach is just different.
Yeah. So our next question. Next question for you, Helly. So we'll see if you agree with it to begin with. But sometimes workplace well-being can feel very polished on the surface. Awareness days, LinkedIn posts, well-being statements, lots of positive language. But day to day, people still feel stressed or unsupported. So the question is, how do workplaces move from that more performative side of well-being into something that actually feels genuine and real for staff?
Great question again. I agree in parts with the first part. A lot of the times, companies will put on a training day or a lunch and learn or an away day or offer some kind of incentive. And it's just, I think something's better than nothing, but often it's just a token, and it's not getting it, and often it can be directed at the individual. So it could be, we looked at how to identify burnout in oneself and other people, which obviously is an individual intervention, an individual way to look at it. But we were doing that in the context, and we said, we usually do this in a group. We don't ask anyone to share. And as an individual, you are responsible to start noticing things in yourself. But that is a group exercise. That's delivered as a group exercise. So it starts raising the awareness of the culture, and it's destigmatizing. So you can see, oh, my manager feels this, or my colleague feels this. So it opens that kind of communication around it. And I think that's where how do they move from that, the performative side? Well, I think starting with something like doing the actual risk assessment, surveying your staff, asking your staff questions, that's way more informative for the organization and to create some kind of culture change than any one-off workshop, awareness workshop. So I think anything that has somebody owns it, you talk about it afterwards. Where is that going? What's it addressing? If somebody's coming in to talk about, say, resilience, increasing resilience, but that hasn't actually been found to be an issue or something that people want or need. Is that helpful? So I think it's understanding what your people need. It's making sure that there's a follow-up from it, because if it's a day, it's actually good. Even if it's an hour and you bring the whole team for an hour and they've lost an hour of time, is that helpful if it doesn't go anywhere? So I think it's part of, the HSE recommend that, you do your risk assessment and then you're monitoring it right through the year. You have people in the organization responsible for that. You have external people coming to deliver things that actually address what the stresses are, because the stresses are often about work design, about how can we make work more comfortable, work better, flow better for the people in the organization. So I think it's got to be right for that organization or right for that team, rather than just some generic well-being incentive.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think, if I was running a company and I didn't have a clue about well-being, I think from that I'd take, okay, across a 12-month period, start by collecting data or collecting evidence, be that staff survey or risk assessment, just get the lay of the land about how things are, and then use that data or evidence to perhaps aim to have one talk or one piece of well-being every couple of months related to what that staff survey has told me. But then really importantly, once each of those things are done, don't just have them as this standalone thing that happens, like get some feedback after it.
Exactly. Get some feedback. How did it land? How's that made any changes? And often a lot of the changes or a lot of the things that can be done, if you do the right surveys, if you do some surveys in a group, find out what is going on for people in the organization. A lot of those changes are made by the people. So, and then, bringing in, having some training around the things that need training. It's really, it's great for the organization, and it's great for the people in it. And it really, rather than just throw your money at something generic, I think put it into something that's going to make real change for the people who are coming to work. I mean, people are investing their lives by coming to work for you. Make it a good place for them. Make it productive. Make it the type of place where people really want to show up and do the best work. Because I really do believe that people want to do that. Most people want to do a good job.
Yeah. All right, we're putting you through your paces, Helly, but this is the last question now.
No, it's brilliant.
And actually, I think we covered this quite well already, but maybe just as a reminder for people. So the question is, people often say you need to notice the signs of burnout, but isn't that part of the problem? When you are overwhelmed and constantly focused on work, you're probably the least likely person to realize how much you're actually struggling.
Yeah, I mean, another great question. So this goes back to the denial part, and and also I think if we put too much responsibility, we can't put all the responsibility on the individual, because yes, when they are going through burnout, they are often the last person to know. And also burnout will often comes from the underlying issues within the workplace. So it's putting it on the head of the individual. Saying that, we do all need to be aware and responsible for our own mental health. And that means if we know what's happening or start to know, it's a bit like when you said about the conversation. If you might not hear it the first time, you might not hear it the second time. So with the symptoms, with the conversation, but with the symptoms, you could go through that exercise individually, and you might not hear it the first time, you might not hear it the second time, but hopefully, when you start going through stress at other times, you will notice, and then you'll put a boundary in and say, actually, if I keep opening my laptop at night time, I'm not going to be able to come to work and perform well the next day. You can say that to your line manager. I've had this experience before where I've been taking work home, and in the end, it led to this, and this. I want to stay here and do my best work. So I'm noticing that my back has started to get really, really tight again. I'm starting to get snappy with my kids and or my colleagues, and I'm noticing this. So I need some help. So, but again, it isn't about, and it isn't just down to the individual. And when the individual really is going through this, they are the last one to see. But that's why, if we have a culture where people are talking about it constantly, and one of the other things that I forgot to mention, I think, was, leadership being really behind managing workplace stress and being vocal. And again, them saying, I don't have training for this, I'm just learning about this. What can we do? That means that it's not just at the individual. Without leadership buy-in and actual, leaders being part of the workshops, the trainings themselves, because they go through the same stresses, and being able to say that. So I think that's a good way of making sure that it isn't just landing on the individual. Because it's really hard when you're going through burnout. You are often in denial, but being through it once or twice or close to burnout, hopefully knowing your individual symptoms will help you.
Yeah, great. The other thing I thought is, I don't know if you've got an example of this, but if we do take this question to be true, that you are the person least likely to notice, I think there's almost a piece of advice there for the individual to say, so therefore, if a colleague does approach you and say, look, I've spotted these things, to try and just make sure that we're taking that conversation seriously, I suppose, with this knowledge that we're least likely to spot it in ourselves.
Yeah. And that's why the training before this happens is important, because if somebody just comes up to you, you're in a very competitive workplace, well-being is not spoken about often, mental health, stress, and then suddenly somebody comes up to you and says, this is, I think you might have burnout. It's probably not going to land that well, but if it's been talked about as a culture, and you can say, oh, when we did that training, and I remember you saying, you got back pain, and I've noticed that happening. Are you okay? I think that's a good way to approach things. It's really embedding the fact that stress happens at work, and let's talk about it. So when it happens, we can talk about it. We can talk about it to each other. We can even talk about it. We can notice it in ourselves. Yeah. But it is a really hard one when someone's going through it. And sometimes when the person's going through it, it's just listening and referring out to other people. So going back to that conversation, we're not there to diagnose. I mean, burnout can't be diagnosed anyway, but we're not there to, put a label. We just say what we've noticed and how it might be affecting them at work, and, can we help, or pointing them to, other services, other people.
Yeah, fab. And we'll also, so on the web page, if you're watching this on Conway Mind's website, or if you're watching it on YouTube, so on the website, we'll have some information about signposting and, different organizations that can be used for signposting. So yeah, thank you so much, Helly.
Oh, thank you.
It's been just really interesting talking to you. It's probably the longest conversation that we've done, but that's a good thing. I could probably stay chatting to you for another hour or so.
Oh, we could chat about this all day, couldn't we? Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great to talk to you, Paul.
Fantastic.